Yeah. So Relic of the Aztecs is an alternative history piece. I wrote that as part of a prompt challenge, actually from a group that John and I are in, DM group, and Discord group. Gets a little less service on Discord, but the thinking there was I had been starting to write a short story that I want to get out next year, and had begun doing research for it and kind of gathering up a bunch of background world building, character development notes, and was finding that I wasn't necessarily ready to jump too far into that. I'm about 2,500 words into it right now. But I had all this material, and there was the idea that, maybe we'll write a short story based on some writing prompts that the guy who runs that group had. And I used it as an exercise to kind of flesh out some background for those stories, and ended up with a story that I like, and basically it is the fall of the Aztec Empire set against the fall of Troy. So it has those two components weaved together, let's say. Obviously, whenever I'm doing writing, I'm always kind of thinking about how it's going to be released. And having done my first short story release last year and turning it into not only a narrative read, but an audio play, audio drama, however you like to call it, I knew I was going to do that again. So it has two versions on the audiobook. One is just me reading, and then the other one is a multi-voiced read. So some of the characters have distinct voices, and also a bunch of sound effects and stuff in there too, which to me helps kind of bring it to life. There might be in the future some video aspects that come out. Obviously, there's like a promo video attached to that tweet, which uses AI to illustrate a little bit of the world. But I think that the first third, well, not even in first segment of the story has a lot of visual and world building symbolic stuff happening in that. And I think it would convert over to a video pretty well. A lot of those images correlate to that segment of the story, but they're not necessarily telling that story in totality. And there's probably a lot more. I know that there is a lot more that can be done with it. So it's probably something that I might play with again in the future, depending on, how time goes and what tools I have access to in due time. I feel like it's not critical to grind ourselves into dust when we're trying to be creative and make cool things that we like. You have to like the stuff that you're making first. I think that's really important. If other people like them, that is also really great. But in terms of, we as writers or we as creatives, there's our own needs that should be satisfied first out of the gate. We have to like the stuff we're doing. There's also a Dune article up there. It's kind of a look at the whole franchise. So, obviously, a lot of people have watched the most recent movies put out by Denis Villeneuve, but there's another movie by David Lynch. Big fan of his work. There are some audiobooks that are discussed that have really great production on them, multi-voiced, again, with a collection of different voice actors over the course of those stories, and some sound effects, a little bit of music in there. Obviously, those books are really, really long, so they use that stuff pretty sparingly, comparatively, I would say, to the short stories that I'm putting out, which are minuscule in comparison to Frank Herbert's work. But then also a little bit of the video game coverage, just kind of looking at how the things that we make can become a platform. I think that there is a brand. Dune has a brand, right, that basically extends into all these other outlets and channels than, in addition to the books, in addition to the movies, right? They exist adjacent to each other and kind of extend out. They offer places for fans to land from wherever they're coming. And that, I think, is a really important and valuable concept in terms of the work that we release, the things that we're putting out into the world, allowing people to find their way to the material from whatever is kind of their chosen shape of uptake, right? If it's video, if it's audio, if it's reading, if it's playing games, if it's merchandise, whatever. I think that we need to think a lot more about how to take advantage of those things, because sometimes people just like a t-shirt and they just like the design, and that's good enough. They don't have to necessarily be totally immersed in an entire project across the board. Maybe they just like one aspect of it. I do that with not only the national park stuff, which has, editorial and audiobooks and videos that go along with it, but also the Chicago 1893 project, which has a slew of different components kind of working around different avenues and distribution channels. So that, has books, audiobooks, video components, artificial intelligence components. It's got some extended reality stuff. I think I need to update them. I'm not sure they're totally working right now, but there's an augmented reality lens that I had put out on Facebook and Instagram using Spark AR, which is their platform for extended reality development. Also have, because there are 3D assets used for that, I also have these 3D assets, a collection of them that can be 3D printed. So I've done some 3D printing with that stuff and given a few out to some folks so they can enjoy them the way that I have. There's just so many different ways to extend the visibility of the projects that we do. And I think, like, Karen, you talk about this stuff too, in your space in terms of like NFTs. Now, I'm not huge on NFTs. I've done one for the Relic, and I've distributed and sold via blockchain for different material. But I think that, like, if you're looking for things to promote around or extend the life of a project, there's good opportunities to find that stuff. And you really should only do the things that make sense to you or make sense for the project. I wouldn't try and shoehorn stuff in, but in general, however you feel there's a good channel for that stuff, or wherever it fits into, test it out and see. Good opportunities to promote around stuff. And I kind of talked about that last night too, that we focus so heavily on the primary work that by the time we finish it, we're kind of feeling like, all right, this is fantastic. I've hit my deadline and now it's out. And we don't necessarily save enough energy or resources to do the promotional aspect or to basically extend the life of these things beyond, like, I sent out a social media post, and maybe while we're producing that stuff, we're not thinking enough about capturing the processes that we use or taking screenshots or pictures to be able to offer up kind of behind the scenes looks at what we're doing and allowing people to see inside of our process, our craft, and also to get more material to kind of build up an ecosystem of content about that content, right? I know that seems a little self-referential. There's a better word for it, recursive in that way. But I think it's really valuable to do that. I save everything. I have an external drive where, even if something doesn't work, I'll save it there. If I thought it was kind of working and later it's not, that can become different material. You can keep massaging it into some kind of shape, or even just show, like, this is what I did and it didn't work. And I think people like that. I do, to a degree. I think that, like, outtakes on shows are cool. When you see them kind of workshopping through what they're making, even if it is just the actors kind of breaking down, laughing at something, or they have some technical difficulty. There's some aspect of production that goes wrong or breaks. It's okay to show that stuff too. Like, nobody's perfect. It's all right to more or less illustrate that and take advantage of when something goes wrong as much as when something goes right. That's my thinking, at least. And sometimes people like to be more buttoned up. I don't know. I make a lot of typos, so I'm fine with it. Same thing goes with like imagery, AI imagery. I feel like maybe a fraction of that material that gets out into the world as we will hit generate to create stuff. Same with video. On the recent 2-month run of stuff I was turning out, there were maybe 10 times as many generations that never see the light of day as versus, and maybe even more, to be honest with you, than what see the light of day versus what actually does get included in that production, just because what you think is cool, say if you have used Runway or haven't used Runway, when you're using motion brush or you're using camera movement, sometimes it stumbles on that initial image and doesn't necessarily turn out a clip that is working, or maybe a clip will fall apart as you extend it out from 4 seconds to 8 seconds to 12 seconds to 16 seconds or whatever, beyond. You get distortion, or it just kind of turns into mush. It doesn't necessarily know how to, it's not smart enough to necessarily know how to move really deep into the future with the information that is inside of a picture. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It just doesn't necessarily do what you had hoped. And it's okay to show that stuff too. There might be something funny there, or in some cases it won't even turn it out because it's like NSFW. I had a few shots that some platforms would not generate because they had nudity in them, like art sculptural nudity of these classic figures. And then sometimes for some reason, like, it must be generating something that it's perceiving as NSFW. So it would be like, it would run 4 seconds of generation. And then when you go to extend it out, it all of a sudden won't turn that material out. It's like, well, what is going on under the hood that something that is completely benign all of a sudden becomes this unsafe material, let's say. Hey, what's going on? T2, you're hanging out. You're welcome to come up and talk. This is an open space for writing and publishing and authors. I've been kind of riffing on my own up here for a little while, but at the same time, it does probably work better as a conversation, though happy to go on and let you guys listen to me, I suppose, if you like that enough. Was kind of talking about Runway right now in terms of writing stuff. And I know, as a writer, you kind of start with words. There's an opportunity to go in the other direction, though, too. Let's say with the first couple of books that I put out, I had these pictures that I would take of national parks and write about the experience based on those images that I thought were strong enough to include in a blog post or in the chapters that they became. Same thing goes with the Chicago project that started as a long form Twitter thread in 2018. And I would basically take one of these Charles Arnold photos from 1893 and put a little blurb with it. And then basically, as that continued on, it becomes a large collection of text, you know. I think by the end of that run, I did it for 125 days over the last 125 days of the 125th anniversary of the event. You know, using like 125 pictures to do that. So by the end of it, there's just a wealth of material there. And even if some of it wasn't in finished shape, well, let me say this again. None of it was in finished shape, but it was in a draft state. It was in a rough draft state that could be collected up and then edited, kind of moved into shape in a nonlinear way. Obviously, like as I started that, I didn't really have a plan for what it would become, you know, 6 years later. But at that first time, you know, as somebody who's worked with content for a long time, there's always a thing like, maybe I could do something else with this. And when you gather up all of that work that you've done, you can go back through it and edit it and move things around, gather them up into topics and themes that are related, and then start to kind of turn into paragraphs and build it into something larger. Eventually you get pages. You know, that book is not incredibly long. I think it's maybe 120 pages right now, but there's a slew of photos in there. More recently, I've started processing them with AI to artificially color them, because obviously, you know, they were sepia back in the day. Now they are, in some cases, really interesting looking color photos. And I think that it actually adds a lot to those images to look at them with color on them, even if, you know, the color might not be high integrity. And by that, I mean, like, I'm using a Python package to do that. It's not always intelligent enough to make those incredibly high quality. But also it might not create the right colors. So, I can't say that I know exactly what color all of the elements of those scenes were, but that's okay. It still adds a lot of depth to it, and it gives a new experience to that material. Some of those images I have put into the 3rd edition of the book, which I released in January. So I think that, like, when we're creating, when we're writing, when we're developing a set of assets and resources, you know, always be thinking about how to revitalize that work, renew it, get new life out of it, and extend it into additional domains in that way. Comfort creature. If you want to come up and talk, you know, request a mic. This is just a hangout. It's not really meant to be me talking at everybody, but I'll continue to do it in the meantime. There's a few links above. I record these sessions locally on my computer and then release them as a podcast. The Nest has a few of those things. All the way to the right is the last session, you know, so it's recorded and then I put it out there. Hopefully more people get to catch up with it in that sense. Maybe in the future I'll start using Twitter to record these, but in the meantime, trying to get additional life out of the content that way. So it goes out to a bunch of different platforms, YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and, you know, a slew of other ones that Spotify, or Podcasters for Spotify, allows you to select and choose. And I think that that is beneficial as well, because there are some people who are not on Twitter. You know, there's a lot of people who don't want to use the platform or choose not to use the platform, and then they can find it. Additionally, it allows for that material to get indexed, and I think that that is also really beneficial when we want to be found and drive traffic to the work that we do. What's up, Dennis? You're more than welcome to come up and talk if you're a writer or you have projects you want to promote. I'm just kind of talking shop right now, talking about some of the stuff that I've done recently, what I do at this space in general in terms of production. There's a few things in the Nest you might like to check out, a few of my projects, and the last session that was recorded 2 weeks ago. We do this every 2 weeks. Everybody is welcome to join in whenever they have time. I understand it is typically during the workday, but that's all right. I would say you may have time in the future. Maybe it's more conducive at a different time in that way. Closington. Hello, Closington. Again, oh, they dropped out, I think. That's all right. It's not for everybody. Yeah. So again, if you have questions, you can leave a comment in the pill, and that might be a good way to do it. If you are at work, then that'll allow me to riff on maybe other things you're thinking about, or other stuff that's important to you, or if you have particular questions in regards to any of the stuff that's linked above, that'll give me a chance to go in the direction that you guys want to. Even if you can't talk, we can take advantage of the tools, and we can actually engage each other that way as well. Just taking a sip of water, and everybody should take a sip of water. Drink water. It's good for you. I drink distilled water, distill it at home, locally distilled, artisanally distilled, local water, getting the parts per million down to single digit levels. That's where I like them. And get out all the whatever's left over from the municipal water supply. Maybe a water freak about it. If you have reverse osmosis, that's a good way to go about it. I like distilled. That's my preferred. Does not require a filter. You don't have to change out your filter over time. And basically I can do a gallon at a time. Takes a couple hours, but that's what I prefer. That's what I like. Keep it in big jugs. That way you get to drink it whenever you need it. Put some in the fridge, keep it cool. Put some in jugs, use it for cooking. That's my preference. Yeah, so back to writing. Looking to do some more videos as well over the near term. I see Dennis is kind of retweeting a couple of pieces up there, engaging with them. Yeah, I would say, if you want to check out some of my work, the links are there. They're available. I've got, half a dozen releases on Amazon or Audible, other platforms as well, depending on if I had the time to put them out there. I find when you are, now that I've been doing this for a while, I find it to be really helpful to think in that kind of thorough way about the writing, and thinking of a schedule, thinking of deadlines, thinking of how the order of production can be timely. And in that way, over starting with last year, I put out a fictional short story in the spring, and then I had a paperback that came out in the fall. Doing that again this year, and then I'll probably do that again next year. That's about the extent of as far ahead as I can think in terms of that kind of schedule. I have more material that I want to work on, but I think that when we are trying to position our releases for release, scheduling out that way, giving ourselves some deadlines is, personally helpful. We can continue to write forever, I think, but at some point you just need to get it done and get it out there as best as it is. You can go back and revise things, clean up the typos, and make revisions as necessary in time. Again, these are all your assets when you're writing this stuff or you're building these projects that you can revisit, and they don't necessarily have an end of life date, just because you made it public. Amazon's really great for that. You can revise the manuscript, load it up again. Sometimes you might have to make some adjustments to the paperback design. If you add pages, then you'll need to make adjustments to, in some cases, you will need to make adjustments to the cover design. So I think over the years, like the Chicago book started at 114 pages and has gone up to 120. So there's like 3 additional pages in there that are being bound. That means that you need to be cognizant of what's going on there, because as the internal material expands, then the cover has to make sure that it accommodates for those additional pages. So you might have to revise that. So save everything. You can go back and tweak. If you do a custom cover design, like in Photoshop or whatever platform you're using, you can go back and edit those things and then basically make slight adjustments to move things around. So to accommodate for the new pages. If you use their cover designer, it might even be easier, because they're basically going to have control of how that works. I did that for the first one, and now I do it custom. I do all my own design for them, just because I wasn't able to do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to in terms of like fonts and laying out images and stuff like that. Just is not. It's a little bit arduous. I think it's not as good as using, say, Photoshop. And you can download templates. They have a slew of those on there. They have one for whatever your page count is going to be. Basically, you can tell them how many pages you have. It will give you the template. You can pull it into Photoshop and start laying out your components. It'll let you know where the barcode is going to be. You need to adhere to some of the design requirements. So if you have, a title and a subtitle, that stuff I'm pretty sure needs to appear on a few sections, like either the spine and the cover. Maybe the subtitle only needs to appear on the cover and not also the spine. But that kind of stuff you want to think about, I would say, well in advance of doing the release, not only for the design, but also kind of optimizing for indexing and basically, getting it to an audience that exists beyond, your social reach or your personal reach whenever you're putting stuff out there. That way, search engines will pick it up. If people are looking for particular terms, that way it will get found. So there's like a huge, and this is kind of an interesting one that I discovered, hack that I discovered from some other folks I used to do a group chat on Clubhouse with. In the keywords section, I think there's like 7 text areas, maybe a few more. I'd have to look specifically to remember, but there's text areas for keywords. And initially, I was just putting in one keyword into each of these text areas, but you're not limited that way. Actually, there's a character count on those text areas. You can put in way more keywords into those spaces until you run out of characters. So in that way, I would say develop a list of keywords for your project when you're going to put it up there. And then what I do with those keywords is I actually use those same keywords as hashtags on posts on like Instagram and stuff like that too. So I have a notepad app, as everybody does with your iPhone. I create an entry on there, and I have like all the links that are there, all the social account links, product links, lists of keywords, synopsis stuff, summary, all that kind of material that you might use repeatedly for promotion. So I can go and grab it and tweak it for whatever it is that I'm putting out at any given time. That way, like, you don't have to rewrite every single time. You can just go right over to your notes, grab that material. If there's a character restriction, you might have to tweak some stuff, but it will save you a massive amount of time to just have those kind of resources gathered up. And that helps me in terms of productivity to be able to, like, just, if I see an opportunity for something to be distributed on a particular channel, then I can lean on that collection of, again, editorial assets that I have developed over years to then uh, distribute it through a new channel. And I would say, like, you can do this kind of stuff across the board, wherever, whatever you're making. I'm doing that with videos too. So going back and finding new distribution for the Exploring Our National Parks series. Justin, you're welcome to come up and hang out and talk. Writing. This is, not a closed session. What I'll do is, when you are putting out videos, a lot of these distribution platforms, say like Film Hub or Amazon Prime, XYZ, whoever, they require particular formatting for the visual components that accompany your release. So say you have like a 2x3 or a 3x4 requirement for a poster, or the headers. Like if you're on Amazon Prime, there'll be like an image that kind of shows up behind the entry. You have to create all that stuff. They don't do that for you. And to save all those things, because you never know, maybe you find a new platform you want to put this stuff out on, then you can basically just go right back and utilize it again. You might have to adjust the dimensions. Say they want 1500 by 2000 pixels, and you had it at 3000 by 4000 pixels. Well, that's easy to adjust, but if you don't have it already, then you have to do that work all over again and start over. So I, like I said earlier, I save everything. I have an external drive that each one of my projects has a folder for itself, and then a slew of folders inside of that for like promotional materials or the raw assets, whether that's like audio, pictorial, video stuff, 3D assets, whatever it is. I kind of gather and silo those things independently so that it's easy to find and it's easy to kind of offboard from your brain the categorization, the cataloging of all that material, so that you can go dig it up or and reuse it. And I would say, like, when you're doing that stuff too, naming conventions are incredibly important. And here we are back at text, the written word. So when I name things, I will put like a couple of project specific words in there, maybe platform specific words in there, maybe dimensional words in there, or how it applies. Say if it's like the Chicago 1893, it'll be like Chicago -1893 -Amazon -paperback -cover, and that way when I'm searching on the Finder or whatever, I'm able to dig that stuff up, without having to dig through a bunch of folders. It'll come up for you rapidly. And this is another thing in terms of SEO that you might consider as well if you're doing web design or putting things out onto the web. When you're loading up these files, having those keywords inside of the file name is also useful, because that can be indexed as well on search engines and stuff like that. So then that basically gives you another opportunity to be found as a resource on search engines. And like, yeah, search engines at this point are kind of getting, I would say, bogged down. Maybe they're getting a little bit sludgy in some ways. So the more you do for yourself to improve searchability and optimization that way, that's helpful, I would say, for you. In creating like backlinks or just being found in that regard. So like the Fall of Tartaria on YouTube has gotten a bunch of external traffic to it from Google, because there are people searching for media about the Tartarian Empire, and luckily they're watching that video, which is not 100% maybe like on task or the exact speed that they're looking for. It's an animated short, a fictional narrative animated short. It's not like stolen history or something like that, or lost history. Some of these more conspiratorial outlets that are speculating about mud flood, I kind of remix some of that stuff and make it hopefully an enjoyable and fun experience to watch. That's, the goal there. But doing all of those things for your assets and for your presence online, do recommend, that you want to make it easy to be found that way. And I think, here we are on Twitter, we're just hanging out. This is a silo. There's only so many people that will participate in this as a live event or be able to find it, because it is fundamentally, limited to what's occurring here on Twitter. But again, as I record these sessions and then release them, it becomes additional content that extends beyond the boundaries of Twitter. Where, a Twitter space, I feel like, yes, people may listen to the recording, but it might not be getting indexed the same way. Some platforms index what's going on Twitter, but they don't necessarily distribute it in the same capacity. Whereas when I push it out as a podcast and it's going onto YouTube, that is particularly getting indexed. When it goes out onto Spotify, that is being indexed on their platform, potentially in turn being indexed on search engines through Spotify as well. And you want to kind of think about these things with your writing. If you're blogging, put in keywords, make your title as relevant to not only the human readers, but the machine readers who are supposed to be helping the human readers. That's who we really want to connect with, I think, as a writer or as somebody that's reporting on findings or making more in-depth journalistic efforts, however you perceive that to be. For me, like I think that there's a value in kind of reporting on the ground as transparently as possible, but then also being a little bit more in depth. I guess journalistic might be the term I would use for something that is more studied and trying to dig through all the nooks and crannies of material. What's up, Carla? You're welcome to come up. I don't want to just be talking at everybody. I'm doing it. I'm here. I'm doing it. But everybody's welcome to come up and talk. This is an open session. So in that way, I would say, like, think about what happens after you press publish. What's going to occur with your material after you've made it available to your audience or the people that exist outside of your audience before you've gotten them to get closer to you and your work in that way. I had done a bunch of blog posts last year on AI tools, and I thought, well, maybe I'll gather those up and put them out as a book. But there was actually a woman who put out a really great book on generative AI for branding and marketing. I was like, well, that's far superior to what I have currently. It is more overview and topical, not necessarily as nuts and bolts. Very, very good introduction to the space. And I had her on the podcast some months ago and kind of recommended, hey, there's a whole collection of workshopping or maybe like workbook components that you could include here, kind of walking people through how to utilize these tools. And she definitely knows how to use them to high effect. And she could basically write a collection of new chapters or maybe dive into some topics a little more deeply, revise that book and put out a second edition that's expanded and also has a lot of those aspects of utilization inside of the book as well. And like, again, that's something that you should consider with your work. Like it even though you put it out, you're it's yours. You can revise it. You can add stuff. You could take things out. You could put new graphics in if you decided that there's some style that you want to embody more completely in terms of like the iconography or the pictorial material within your releases. Um, I try to be multimodal in that way with the stuff that I do, as I've been talking about over the last hour almost. And you can shuffle through all that stuff. You can use it as social media posts. You could use it as finished product. Um, you can use it as promotional material. And by that, I don't just mean um, like social media type of stuff, but above like the Relic of the Aztecs, that has a video that accompanies it here on Twitter. Well, I post that video up on other platforms as well. So it's on YouTube as just as that commercial. But what that allows me to do is say I put out a press release, and I do put out press releases for my project. Those videos can be embedded into those press releases. In some cases, those press releases are being picked up by other websites that pull that material from RSS. So it will also embed that video. And that means that like you're getting more eyes on the video. You're getting more SEO presence. Stuff is getting indexed that way. Potentially they have audiences that are reading them and are finding your material that way. So, as I have said, think thoroughly about what occurs after you press publish, because there's just so many different steps that you can take to increase your visibility. And again, like use the whole buffalo. Excuse me, taking a drink of water here. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, drop something in there. I'm just kind of riffing. Usually there's other people hanging out and talking, and it's just me kind of talking at you guys. Happy to go in depth about anything if there are particular questions, or talk more about what I'm going to be doing over the coming months a little bit more as I continue to flesh out the book projects, the video projects that I have. And I do consider, writing to take all these different forms. I don't think of, only doing blogging or books as writing. We can write scripts, we can write videos, you can write courses. I have a video course on content development for personal branding and small business. Put those out as books. Right now, I'm putting out that video series on a couple of additional platforms because, again, it's already ready. All of those assets are ready to be deployed and increase visibility for the project and what I'm doing, and ideally to make sales as well. If you want to be commercial about your work, that is, I'm a proponent of that. Sell your work. If you want to give it away, there's lots of things that I put out there that are just publicly available too. I think balancing that out is important. Finding projects that you believe can just be released and made available versus things that you think are kind of milestone works, landmark works of a project, or for your own personal endeavors, like the documentary, for example, the Chicago doc. That's up on Amazon Prime. I've never released that documentary publicly. It's only available if you rent or purchase it, because it took me a year to make. It's a big work. I spent a year writing it, creating the book in advance of that. So, in a sense, it took 2 years to do. And I think that when we are building these larger works, that we should seek ways to have some gain off of them. it was very cool when it premiered at an actual theater, and that's, again, a promotable event that becomes social media content. They all kind of spin together. Um, and you want to kind of connect those dots over time. Like I said, that project particularly has been going for 6 years. It has a little bit of a life of its own. I've done a bunch of podcast appearances discussing the project. It has been, if for anybody that's familiar kind of with the Chicago media landscape, it's been featured on WGN a couple of times, which is pretty notable for that like media market. If anybody does or doesn't know WGN, they're kind of a monolith, a leviathan of the Chicago media market, with a very long and storied history for, gosh, I don't know, maybe 100 years or something. And it's a point of pride for that project, that it has reached those channels over time, to be able to get to talk with folks that were interested enough in it to give it a feature on WGN is cool. And I think that there's other outlets for whatever you're doing that maybe it's kind of like the jewel of your promotional targets, when you're working on this stuff and trying to get it out there. That way you have something additionally, or in addition to the actual work, to put in your path and to try and attain. There's a lot of value in that. And again, like when they put out those blog posts or they put out those podcasts, they do that coverage, that stuff's getting indexed. That drove a lot of rentals and purchases of the documentary both times that it was covered on there. And, again, getting people into the social media profiles that exist for that project, it did that as well. I don't want to seem like everything is capitalist or necessarily just about like self-promotion, but like we do this work and we want people to see it and we want it to benefit us beyond the self-expression, or, beyond just the expression, and to keep kind of digging away, chipping away at those efforts is a very valuable thing that gives the project life. There's always a little further to go. We're only ever halfway as far as we might be able to get at some point. But hey, we've been hanging out for an hour. Do you guys have any questions? Are there any thoughts? Would anybody like to speak? I usually do these for an hour. I usually do them with other people speaking too. Today you guys get to just listen to me blather on, and hopefully there was some value to that. In that sense, you guys have been hanging out for a while. If there's any final thoughts, I would say take this time to drop a comment on the post. Otherwise, I'm going to probably wrap it up here because, we've been doing it for a while. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Do this every 2 weeks here on Twitter Spaces. Do appreciate you hanging out. We'll talk before too long, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.